Welcome back to the Storytime cast, everyone. This is episode 2. It's the second one. We've made it to 2 episodes. How do you feel about that, Winters?
It's beautiful. Well, Storytime podcast. Yeah, I just had to get that out, like clearing the phlegm. Mm-hmm. It's exciting. It's look, now it's 2. It's definitely a series, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we made it part. Yeah. Like the first one didn't kill us, so we've come back.
Yeah.
That's a big thing, because lots of things that kill you, you don't get to try again. So that proves that we can try this again. So we didn't die last time.
Are there any things that do kill you that you get to try again?
I don't think so, unless you can experience it as a corpse. So maybe parachuting out of a plane, you could.
Maybe.
So you could jump out of a plane, parachute could fail. Hit the floor, they load you straight back into a plane again, chuck you out a second time. It's probably the same outcome, but you do get to experience it twice.
I went to a stag do in Swansea once, and that killed me, and I could experience it again.
And you could do it again. Okay, so maybe you can then.
Maybe you can. But yeah, part 2, I'm looking forward to the trilogy personally, because trilogies are good, aren't they? Lord of the Rings, all that sort of stuff. The original Star Wars trilogies are good. So when we make a trilogy together of beautiful content babies, then I'll be more content in our content babiness. Yeah, how are you anyway? You're right.
I'm good. This is the like tricky second part. It's always difficult. The second one's always difficult in like Lord of the Rings, and because they can't fit. You have to set up in the first one. This is a bit of meat in the middle, but you can't get too close to the end. Anyway, I'm doing fine. And today, I thought, because last episode was kind of like it was a bit of an intro, it was a bit of a teaser, right? So we ended up talking about the 13th, and we set down the premise that we're going to have questions from the community and stuff like that. But obviously, we didn't have any questions because it was the first one. So today I thought, for our first episode in the way it's going to be going forward, we could start right at the very start of 40k lore, as it were.
Right.
So I'm thinking we're going to talk a little bit about the War in Heaven, and then after that we do have some questions here from the community, which we're going to have a little look at.
Right.
So what the War in Heaven? Do you know much about it? You probably know everything about it, right? You were there. Were you there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the oldest part of 40k lore that we know of. There was a war in heaven, which turns out probably was more than one war. It was many, many wars. But the war in heaven refers to... It's in the Eldari lore. They remember it. It's in the Necron lore, the Necron tier. They remember it. That's our main drivers from the source material.
Yeah.
And basically, in the very old days, there was a race of people called the Old Ones. Yep. And there were other races that were very old, such as Catans, that were born and ate stars.
They were big jellyfish things
and then
energy beings, weren't they, that just roamed around?
Yeah.
We're talking over 60 million years.
Smite without dabbling in the warp. What?
Yeah. We're talking over 60 million years. I think it was something like
60 million years ago. And basically, the Necron tiers and the Old One went to war. And so the Old Ones fought back with biological super weapons, such as the Harad, the Gork, the Eldari, and many other races. That's one of the ways they fought back. The Old Ones also had the Webway. They're the ones that made the Webway. Yes. And they fought back against Necron tiers. And at the end of the confrontation, you have Catans wiped out, Eldari wiped out, Orcs wiped out, almost all life sterilized from the entire galaxy, the no biomass, the asteroid came along, killed the dinosaurs here on Earth. That's how it ties. Our Earth ties into 40k lore. They're not saying it was an asteroid. They were saying that the asteroid was probably a bit of a Death Star that blew up, that tumbled into Earth and caused an extinction level event galaxy wide. And the Necrons were left looking around, going, "Oh dear, it's a bit barren now. Biotransference. Let's get that started." Well, we can't because there's no biological stuff. Bugger, we'll go to sleep for a bit and then we'll get up later when there's bio back again, and then we'll wash that bio out, put it on the tumble dryer, and then dust all the stuff off of it, and once we've battered it into shape and dried it, then we'll biotransference one more time. And the warp as well during the end of the War of Heaven was a roiling inferno of hate, so much so that the warp gave birth to this race of creature called the Enslavers, and then you have the Enslaver plague going all the way across the galaxy and scouring the galaxy of life that way as well. Everybody died except the Necrons.
Except the Necrons, yeah. So from what I understand as well, the warp beforehand, the webways and the warp were filled with somewhat benevolent entities before this all happened. And it was kind of the schism, it was the damage done with the power of the weapons that were being used. It was the damage done that was basically attacking reality and unreality, and the material matter and the immaterium at the same time. And it kind of boiled everything up and paved the way for essentially chaos. And the thing is as well is that the old ones were developing weapons, like you said. They were developing and encouraging these races to rise up, and the Eldar were such a powerful race themselves that they had the innate ability to, when combined, create gods, which they then went on to do, which was a bit rude. Pretty bad one.
Eldari were a great biological weapon, super weapon, because back then, just as they are now, they're as equally at home in the warp as they are in real space. Their souls cross. Well, maybe not physically in the warp, but spiritually they can. They used to, before She Who Thirsts was born, be able to travel the warp freely. So they could. They're a spiritual race. They're a psychic race. They're a psychically attuned race, bred for exceptionalism in all things, and that's how the paths were born after the fall, after Slanesh was born, which is 30k. So they were a weapon that could straddle both boundaries of the immaterium and materium. The orcs as well were immune from the attacks from the immaterium, or largely immune from attacks from the immaterium, because they breed their war energy. War energy is self-perpetuating and largely insulates them from the warp. It's like they're drawing reservoirs of energy out from the immaterium, which is not tainted with chaos, in the same way that faith amongst the sisters is drawing energy, is drawing power from somewhere, and it's all warp manifested stuff essentially. And and then there was because the Necrons were masters of the physical universe. People know about the massive Necron. There's a big Necron temple somewhere, probably in Chipping Norton.
Yep.
And there's a few priests hanging around this Necron temple. You know how dodgy it is in Chipping Norton?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And they're hanging out and they're drinking their cider and stuff like that. And inside the temple is a map of every single star in the galaxy spinning around. And these drunk blokes from Chipping Norton, if they pop open one of those suns, then the sun winks out. They can turn off and turn on, presumably, suns anywhere in the entire galaxy, which obviously has a devastating effect for any planet circling that sun and any life. That's how powerful the Necrons are. Yeah. And you can imagine that back during the War in Heaven, even greater. It's said that by the end of the War in Heaven, like the Eye of Terror, is a merging of real space and unreal space, the immaterial and material. It's where the warp bleeds through into our reality. By some accounts, it's said that the whole of the galaxy was like that.
Right.
The fabric that separates our space from their space was so tattered and worn. To say that there was an our space or our space is pushing it only at the very, very boundaries. The webway was always good though. The webway is a construction of the old ones. The Eldar just borrowed it, just like the Emperor after during 30K.
I believe at that time as well.
He borrowed a bit of it.
Just a little pinch, yeah. I think at that time as well,
pinch.
Kegarak, the laughing god, was also kicking about at that time. So you had these like the whole situation's a bit weird, and it's kind of been mucked around a little bit with the different iterations of the Necrons starting. I know it's kind of a different story when you go back to old Necrons, but the current canon for this whole thing kicking off is a little bit rude actually. All it is that the old ones knew how to live forever, and the Necron tier didn't know how to live for very long at all because their horrible home planet sun was basically giving them horrendous cancers and withering them away, and they had very short lives. So they asked the old ones, "Sorry, mate, can we have a bit of that living forever stuff, please?" And they said no. And eventually, I believe the Silent King leveraged that because of the way the Necron tier were, much like they are now. They have a lot of infighting because they're all pompous lords and whatnot. I believe the Silent King leveraged that whole situation to bring the war. He worked out
the deals. He was wheeling and dealing with the Catans. He was the one. He was the one's signature on the paperwork. You know, it was him.
Yeah, and I believe in the old law, the Catan were kind of pulling all the strings, and in the new law, the Necrons kind of took a bit more control over them.
First edition Necron Codex, and second, I think just the first edition Necron Codex, it was flipped on its head. So they retconned it because it's 40k, and they do that sometimes. So now they've done it so that the Catans are shattered, and that you have these Catan shards locked away in Tesseract vaults and the Nightbringer and things. But the old law was the Necrons didn't beat the Catans beat the Necrons.
Yeah.
So the Catans enslaved the Necrons. Basically, the story is the same. Necrons versus Old Ones and all their... Necrons and Catans versus everyone else, including all the things that the Old Ones could mix up in their chemical soup, including the Eldar and the Orc and everything, versus everyone else. And then once that had been done, the new law is Silent King then turned on the Catans and shattered them and broke them as well. That's how powerful Necrons are. They were able to take out these star gods. Old law is, at the end, no, they're just enslaved.
Yeah.
They're just enslaved, and the Catans broke apart their kingdoms, and the Catans won in the old law. And they weren't shards. The Nightbringer and the Deceiver weren't Catan shards. They were, here's the Catan of the Nightbringer, here's the Catan of the Deceiver. That was supposed to be them, not a tiny shard. Which
is good, because I don't think the way that the Catan are made out to be, they can literally like snuff out a star with a breath, and they consume souls and all this kind of stuff, and basically a shard of them being as powerful as they are just goes to show what a
can I just say
at
the time when they flipped that on its head, obviously there were some people who were change but when you think about it, that little switch saying but by doing it that way, not making the Necrons enslaved for the Catans, and the Catan being it did two things. It solved two things straight away. One, it shows you in 40k terms, because 40k is everything bigger, just how powerful the Necrons were back then.
Yes.
The Necrons were powerful enough to destroy star gods and shatter them. That is an order of magnitude power. Like the Emperor is an order of magnitude power beyond, I don't know, an Aardvark. It's an order of magnitude of power beyond where the Necrons are now. And I love it whenever 40k dials up to 11, turns up to ridiculous values. So it did that, which is brilliant. It shows, wow, that must have been really, really bad, and they must have been really, really powerful back then. And the second thing, of course, it did is give the Necrons their agency back. No one wants to play, hey, here's my race of undead robot zombies. Instead, their lords and their nobles and their things have an element of personality now, and their houses have an element of history now, and so it put the Necrons center stage, and it gave them some real juice to their backstory.
Yeah, and
I think I prefer it.
Yeah, I much prefer it. And actually, the reason why I brought that up as well is because in a minute I wanted to kind of look at where that puts, where the events happen there, how that translates into the current setting, which is useful because it completely changes what the kind of threat and what Necrons are. But we'll get to that in a moment. One of the, because I just wanted to say, one of the things that I really love about the new version of Necrons and their new kind of personality based lore is that now they've become a little bit more comic book villain to a certain extent because of the things that they get up to. But I've been reading The Infinite and the Divine, and it mentions in there that because they essentially have achieved an eternal life, as it were, time is really not as important to them. And they've got a lot of time to spend, and some of them are awake and some of them aren't. The cryptecs who are artists and playwrights and things like that in their flesh forms, back in their flesh times, can now program these huge plays and scripts into the bodies that will be acting it out. And it's said that some of the plays the cryptecs write, which are all based on teaching history to other Necrons and preserving history, can go on for decades at a time, because no one actually needs to get up to go to the toilet. They don't have to have an interval. There's no ice cream going round. So these people end up sat there for 10 plus years watching this magnum opus from a cryptech, and I love that it's kind of given them something, because I mean I think the old rules were that they used to beat them by making them phase out, didn't you, by damaging them a certain amount. They just had nothing really on the table apart from just empty Terminator bodies essentially. So yeah, it's good stuff. So that's in a very light nutshell. The War in Heaven's got loads of bits about it, and you can go watch. There's 2-hour videos. I think Luton's done a load of stuff going into physics and like hours and hours of the how time works and all this kind of stuff going from back then. Yeah,
I always recommend Luton. Good stuff.
Yeah, he goes into serious detail on some of these subjects, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. It was several races that still exist now. One important thing to say is that the Krork were not. They were proto-orcs. They weren't the orcs that we have today. They were kind of a superior version of the orcs that we have today. I don't think it's been fully fleshed out, but the Krork were essentially very powerful. They were the meathead race that were raised up by the old ones. They were all about power and violence and toughness, whereas the Eldar were about intelligence and agility and grace and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you have Harad as well, and they're supposed to be at one with radiation. So to fight them, if Games Workshop ever do the Harad properly, or not properly, it's their law, they can do them however they want to, but according to the old law, they'd be firing radioactive weapons at you, and just fighting them will give you 7 cancers.
A lot of deep striking.
And then, so there's that side of things. And then you have, it's also listed that the Jokero were one of the engineered races of the old ones as well. So they're the Einsteins of the galaxy, the engineering geniuses who happen to be monkey-looking races. But yeah, they're geniuses. And they do have a model. The old ones threw everything and the kitchen sink at the Necron tier.
Yeah. So yeah, and I believe as well, the old ones actually died out during this as well.
It's believed that they were killed. It's believed that they lost. Yeah.
Yeah, and the old ones.
But victory. Well, history is written by the victors, right?
Exactly.
And the Eldari and the stuff, they definitely think that they, they thought that they won. Well, no, they didn't, because all their gods are dead, so sorry, aren't they? Apart from the laughing god who ran away into the webway to escape the devastation.
Yeah.
So no, history written by the victors. I was going to wax lyrical about that, but I decided not to, because that's completely wrong. So what we've got is just bits and pieces around the edges.
Yeah, and we did have some very interesting, some very old artwork as well, where the old ones were kind of depicted essentially as kind of like lizard men, because I think there was an early drawing of them as Slan.
Well,
which were essentially frog lizards.
That's because you're looking at really old lore from Rogue Trader and Second Ed.
Yep.
And back then, games were... Well, Warhammer 40k was unashamedly Warhammer Fantasy battles set in space.
Exactly,
it was unashamedly... Yeah. You like orcs in Warhammer Fantasy? Do you want to play space orcs? You like elves? Let's go play space elves. It was unashamed. That's what it was trying to do. That's what it was aiming for. Yeah. And in Warhammer Fantasy battles, you had the Old One race, and they were Slan. And they were the fat lizard psychic beings. Those were the old ones back then. So people assume that the old ones are that same race, that same species, that same sort of thing. But we just don't know. It could just be that. I imagine that if we ever get some nuggets about what's going back there, now 40k has diverged so far. Their 40k old ones are completely different to fantasy old ones. 40k old ones might be... like in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, that ego guy, that Kurt Russell. They might be Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
Next time you see Kurt Russell, he could be an old one.
Or it could be those guys from the film Prometheus as well, where they're kind of those weird...
What?
Oh, that's a bit more like Catan, actually. No, ignore that. That's too close to something.
Okay.
It actually is.
It's gone.
But they could just be a thing. You know,
I don't even know what you're talking about.
They could just be slugs. They could be anything, right? They could be anything. And... it's already been rewritten a few
Dr.
times.
Manhattan. They're like that. 1,000 feet tall, glowing blue guys that has which in the comics is completely naked, but in the movie they had to give him little tighty whities.
I know, instead of a little...
Could be that guy.
Because he could create anything he wanted. He could have given himself a massive set of abs, couldn't he? So the only thing is...
Exactly. He was...
If they had to create all these races to fight for them, I imagine that their physical forms probably weren't too overpowered, let's just say. You know, it doesn't mean they're weak physically, but they certainly weren't 1,000-foot Dr. Manhattans, because then they might have been able to deal with this stuff themselves. So there must be something a bit more fragile, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, they had complete mastery over time and space and the warp. That's the general idea.
Yeah.
That reality then was a lot more fluid than it is now. Like I said, the oval, it was a lot more fluid. The warp was a lot calmer. You could actually muck around with the strands of fate and time and reality. Maybe they created the galaxy, the old ones. Who knows? They're the first recorded, the oldest recorded. But when we hear of the Cabal in the 30k series, we definitely hear of, I think it's in Legion, where John Chromaticus talks of species older than stars.
Okay. Right, let's just lead that into...
But yeah, it was all a bit...
Yeah, sorry, carry on.
It was all a bit wobbly back then, so they could do all of these things. So then you have to think about, maybe they're fat and they can't go anywhere and they're stuck in these chairs. Or maybe that's just the Slan thing, the overlay from Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and they were something else entirely, and they could use whatever they needed to use to destroy a race of living metal machines that can't be destroyed. That can't be stropped. That cannot be stopped. Cannot be reasoned with. Cannot be bargained with. And absolutely will not stop until you are dead.
Which is funny because it turns out that some of the Necron dynasties are actually fairly all right. They're like a bit of diplomacy later on. But let's fast forward about 65 million years to the 41st million. Right, so as far as we're concerned, the old ones are gone. There's no one knows about them. Only the ancient races still have a know about these things, don't they? To a certain extent, if they can remember back that far. you got people like Trazin the Infinite, who keeps a special. He's been awake for a lot of it, and he keeps a special archive where he's got some of the old relics that he's got displays on the War in Heaven, where I guess he's got bits and pieces that remind you some Krork and stuff like that. But all that aside, we've got 65 or 60 million years later. The Necrons are in like a weird situation. They didn't make biotransference, so they've gone to sleep. What we do know is that they're not waking up altogether how they were expected. So we have a race that essentially came out on top of the most powerful things in existence. Nothing of which like that exists in the current setting, right? The current the 41st millennium, 42nd millennium is infinitely a weaker situation than it was back then. Even the Eldar are they're scattered. They're having to live out their existence in constant fear and trying to avoid being consumed. They're the powerful race. The Orcs have devolved. The Krork have devolved into the modern Orcs. Tyranids have just rocked up, which is probably a bit of a shock. The species of man are, the best things that man can bring to the table. I mean, I'm sure a Primarch would have just been essentially punched across the room by a Catan back in the day. So the best things that man kind of produced, apart from the Emperor himself, I wonder where the Emperor would have stood in all that kind of stuff, but apart from the Emperor himself, just very low power on the radar. So where do you think, I mean, obviously Necrons have been deliberately changed. They've been retconned, and they've been brought back to the 41st millennium from this conflict which they've won. Where do we think that this is going, or do you think that they've been suitably downsized now to not be the same kind of threat?
I don't think they've been suitably downsized at all. There is a gorgeous Imperial Armour book called The Fall of Orpheus, and it's about a Necron dynasty waking up in the Orpheus sector. And if you can get your hands on it, get your hands on it. Yeah. And this is one dynasty waking up, so a few hundred tomb worlds cracking open because it's a dynasty. And we know that there's hundreds, thousands of dynasties. And all of the dynasties bow to the Silent King. This one dynasty wakes up in the Orpheus sector, and God bless Alan Bligh, rest in peace, and the people who wrote this book. It is a tsunami. It takes decades, but the beginning to the end is only a couple of decades, and there is absolutely nothing anyone can do. They wipe out 3 Space Marine chapters. They're essentially saying, like, if the Blood Angels, Ultramarines, and Dark Angels were in the Orpheus sector, one on the right, one on the left, one down below, when this dynasty wakes up, they'll all be gone. Wiped off the map completely. They take out a whole fleet and a whole armada. Tyranids get in the way. They get wiped out. Everything dies.
Wow, okay.
Just this one dynasty waking up. That's what it's like to face a dynasty waking up. This is one dynasty didn't wake up in bit parts as well. It all woke up all roughly at the same time across a few hundred worlds. Glorious. So that book actually gets across the feeling of the Necron threat in a very 40k over the top. Oh my God, look at it. It's huge. What Big are baddies. We ever going to do kind of way. Yeah. The Necrons, if you pay attention to the deep lore and things like that, and you multiply that by a few thousand dynasties, and the Necrons, and the fact that they did manage to take on the old ones and defeat them and their species and the warp, even if they get 50% of the power that they had back then, they've still got enough to let the galaxy burn. Yeah. But the difference, the playmaker, the new player that we have on the block now is the Tyranids. Because I'm going to strip it all down. The Tyranids are an organism that eat galaxies. Mm-hmm. So the only way to defeat the Tyranids is if an entire galaxy bands together with everything to try and... But even then, we don't know if every species on the galaxy banded together to defeat an organism that defeat an organism that eats galaxies. Will that be enough to defeat an organism that eats galaxies? Because maybe it already ate galaxies that were strong enough to bound all together, but it's an organism that eats galaxies, so it doesn't really matter if you're bound together. Or maybe it's eating 100 different galaxies at the same time, and we can swat away this little bit of the claw that's coming out for us if we all bound together. So we've got this new threat on the block, which is why the Silent King, who is the oldest by millions of years, he didn't go into the long sleep, he's the oldest, wisest, and should be the most powerful being in 40k alive, and it's such a shame that they didn't. The Silent King isn't like a Primarch coming back. The Silent King is like the Emperor coming back.
Yeah. And it's not
but
been...
on the tabletop, he's not. Anyway, but in the lore, he is.
Yeah.
When does the tabletop ever match the lore? And so the oldest, most wisest, most powerful person that we know of in the galaxy who's alive today, technically alive, thinks that the Tyranids are the biggest threat. So that means the Tyranids are the biggest threat. Mm-hmm. When Einstein argues with me about quantum physics, I don't argue back. I say, okay, Einstein, 1 equals 2. Whatever you say, whatever you tell me, Einstein, I'm down with. So when the Silent King has fought the Necrons, has fought the Tyranids and had best of bros and fist bump time with the Blood Angels, and they fought side by side, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the Silent King and Dante, sweeping through the meadow, laughing happily with each other, and all that stuff. So the consequences now are that the Tyranids are going to eat us all, and we better help the Silent King.
Well,
because they're playing the long game. They don't care about what's going to happen in the next 1,000 years.
Oh, yeah, that means nothing.
Or next 10,000 years.
Yeah.
They care about the next few million, which is why it's not too bad for them to snuff out a star, because you can snuff out a star, and that's fine. But that's why they don't like snuffing out stars, by the way, because you can stuff out a star and get rid of your problem today. But when you're playing the long game of 2 million years, 5 million years, 20 million years, stuffing out that star in 20 million years' time will have all sorts of gravitational problems in your... So they don't use that one very often. So that's where we are now.
The thing we've got to remember is that Tyranids, for a start, we apparently have only seen the tips of the tendrils, just the tip, in terms of what could be coming, right? But second of all, Tyranids very much depend on momentum based on consuming biomass to continue, right? They consume a planet, they consume the biomass, they all jump in pools of acid, melt down, get sucked up in giant straw, and then they go on to the next one. But the Necrons have one very useful thing going for them. That is that they didn't have any biomass left to go back to their meat bodies. And in fact, one of the, what's his name? The Divine, Oricon the Diviner, is working really hard to transcend the need for bodies at all and become beings of light and energy and stuff like that, which is a real problem for the Tyranids, because they need to consume stuff to create stuff. So they are really the only answer to the Tyranid problem, which is going to happen at some point inevitably. If the timeline keeps going on and more Tyranids arrive, they will need something that cannot perpetuate the Tyranid invasions to stand in the way, and that will be the Necrons. They do, however, I didn't want to go too much purely into Necrons on this one, because I think there's a lot to say about Necrons, but they are also they've been given a position in the universe that is not necessarily evil, right? And I think this is really important. Chaos, you can't have goodies and baddies on those two sides team up and high five like a bloodthirster and then go to war together, right? You can't have that. But there are ways in which Necrons and those who are not extreme xenophobes can team up. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. Have you got anything more you want to say about this before we move on to some questions from the...
Well, I think we covered it. The Necron lore, when you start... See, the thing is, as soon as you start talking about the war in heaven, you have to mention the Necrons, because it's about them.
It is about them.
And then as soon as you start mentioning the Necrons, you have to mention the far future as well. this timeline of the Necrons is 60 odd million years ago, for thousands of years or 10,000s of years, for a length of time undisclosed, and also time was a bit wishy back then, as was reality, as was the warp. But for an undisclosed period of time, they were around, lots of wars, everybody dies, they go to sleep, the long sleep. And their story ends probably 60 million years in the future as well, or tens of millions of years in the future as well. We're just catching them at the round of the time of the Imperium where they're waking up. They've actually pushed back the waking up of the Necrons. Originally as well, one of the things they've retconned, originally they've only been waking up for the last 1,000 or so years, or 2,000 or so years. They've actually pushed it back to the time of the Horus Heresy. There are reports in the Heresy now of very Necron-tier, Necron-esque and Blackstone and weird things happening then. So it looks like some of the tomb worlds, because of time dilation, because of the problems with the warp, because of She Who Thirsts, Slanesh, basically, and warp spilling over into real space more and more and more, and time dilations, the Necrons, some rumours of the Necrons exist in the time of the Horus Heresy and the Great Crusade as well.
I think part of that,
interesting.
Part of that as well is for character building and to try and tie things together a bit more, because, for example, Trazyn the Infinite woke up early and he was being naughty. Basically, there's a few key players in the Necron sort of storyline who woke up early and they've kind of been written back into events. So he was apparently there on Istvan and at Kalth, and he was collecting. It's funny because they considered this massive event, the Horus Heresy, as just it's the human civil war. The humans are just having a war with each other. It was relatively uninteresting, relatively inconsequential to the Necrons, but Trazyn the Infinite, being who he is, wanted a few nice displays for his Solemnis. So he was, he's got like a display of salamanders fighting, and he puts them in little dioramas and stuff, and all this kind of stuff. So I think a lot of that is just to. It's nice. It goes back. It just irons everything out so that your chosen army can feel like it's part of the deeper lore where it previously wasn't. So yeah, I like it. I think it's really good. And there's so much to say about Necrons.
It sets the. Not just Necrons, but the Eldari and other species. It sets the humans in a broader and broader. The more they give us this information, the more we realise how vast the setting is, and how small the Imperium of Man is in this vast overall tapestry. But of course, we're interested in the Imperium of Man, the last hurrah of the human race before it's wiped out.
There are guys, yeah.
Yeah.
We can't identify with a 60 million year old angry robot.
Nah.
Or can we?
Nah, instead we identify with a 7 foot tall, genetically engineered super soldier wearing power armor. That's why we love Halo so much. Or instead we identify with a half cyborg. No, not even half cyborg, half machine. Hey, I had this idea the other day. Can I just share this with you?
You share the idea. Go for it.
I was watching one of Luton's videos, the worst death in 40k, and some of the bad ways to die in 40k. Here's a bad way to die. This is one that the Mechanicum do.
Okay. I'll sit
So
back.
Warsmith Chris, you're a tech adept, right?
Yeah. Hi.
You've come up the ladder. You've joined the guild.
Yeah.
You've greased the right poles, and you've stroked the right handles.
Yeah.
And you've got loads of gadgets attached.
Yep.
You want the RoboCop, the gun in your right thigh. Yeah, you get that.
Yeah. Okay.
You want you want the red eye thing. You get that. You want a power arm, a really strong arm, so whenever you're shaking something, you can do it a lot,
shake it really
forever
hard
with your arm.
Yeah.
Yeah, shake it. Say you're a tech adept. You've been given all the gifts. You could even just be little more than a brain and a stem and a nose and a left arm in a vat like that.
Yep.
But you can run faster. You can store so much data. You can sniff in 78 different. You can see sniffs, and you can sniff sees. The electrospectrum, the microwave spectrum, the Atari spectrum, all these things. You've got all these superpowers, right?
Yep. Hi, that's me.
And you're judged guilty of knowledge crime by the Mechanicum.
Okay.
And what they do to you is they'll take you into a thing, they'll stick you in a vat, or they'll stick you in a thing, and they'll slowly, one by one by one, and it might take 100 surgeries depending on how many implants you've got, take them away from you.
No.
Bit by bit by bit. So they'll take away your legs, and all of a sudden you can't walk anymore. Then they'll take away your sight, and all of a sudden you can't see anymore. Then they'll take away the smallest bit that they can, and they'll slowly deconstruct you. You know, like when you wake up, when you sat down, you're having a burger, you're watching something on YouTube, and you go to stand up, and you don't realise that you were sat on your leg, and your left leg doesn't work, and you fall over, and you get a face full of burger. You know those moments?
Happens all the time.
Oh God, my leg's gone.
Yeah.
All those moments when you suddenly can't see anymore. You shouldn't have had that second bottle of whiskey, and suddenly you've gone blind. You know those moments?
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
Those moments where you really just can't get up in the morning. You just can't.
Yeah. Don't want to get up.
Or the moments when people ask you a question like, Warsmith Chris, what did you have for tea yesterday?
I can't remember.
See, blank.
Yeah,
See?
I can't remember.
An admech would pull it up like that. But sometimes your brain just lets you down.
Yep.
Imagine losing bits of yourself, each and every part of yourself, bit by bit by bit by bit, so you become lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser, but they sustain you and make you aware of every part. And also the process takes a very long period of time. There's no point in pulling out off your left ear and then going straight onto your right ear. No, pull off your left ear.
Let you experience it. You want to experience
they'll send you about to do some business without a left ear for a week, or they take your nose away or your little finger away, and then bit by bit so disassemble you bit by they take away the parts of the machine that you were blessed with until all that's left is whatever's left. And that process might take 100 years, and then they kill you.
That's horrible. So here's a question.
It's not a nice way to die, is it? It's a horrible way to die.
So when you're a person and you're part of this cult, and you're part of this whole machine thing, you're aiming to reach Crux Mechanicus, right? You're aiming for that 50. You're more machine than man. And then they do this to you. What's it called when you go back? Then do you reach Crux Humanitas?
More man. I don't know.
More man than machine.
Yeah, they still see themselves as human. They don't want to go completely into machine. They see it as perfecting themselves.
Do you know what the Necrons do?
I don't know what
punishment.
What?
They just turn off your resurrection protocols and then just kill you. That's it. You don't. You don't go back into the resurrection.
Did you say erection?
Yeah, the erection
protocol.
Yeah, that's exactly what they do, and then you can't have an erection.
I'm hearing erection.
Again. Yeah. Could you imagine that as a punishment?
Now I'm imagining Necrons with erections, and you put that image in my head. And now there's 1,000 people listening to this who are now imagining Necrons with erections, and that's your fault, Warsmith Chris. Apologise to the people now.
I can't apologise for something that I'm pleased with, though. You know,
Warsmith Chris, say sorry to the people for putting the image of Necron erections in their head. Say sorry.
Dear listeners, I truly apologise for putting the very vivid, graphic, close-up image of a fully erect
Necron.
You're
doing it wrong.
In your mind's eye. Is that all right? Are we getting cancelled?
The bigger the Necron war chassis, that they're in, right? Does that mean they get a bigger adapter down there to plug into the other things, or is it all the same size and it doesn't matter whether you're the size of a Scorpec Lord or a little warrior, you've just still got the same adapter down there?
It could just be the same adapter, couldn't it? Because I think that they're built for efficiency, so there's no point in having an extra large adapter.
It's just a USB cable, that's it.
Always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Necron USB cable.
So we have
What
15
about the
minutes.
nipples?
Oh no, here we go.
Are we moving on?
we got to move on before we get turned off. We get shoved off the air.
Members' questions. If you'd like to get your questions, how do they do it again?
There is a little channel on the Winters SEO Discord called STC. You just go in there and ask it. And how do you get onto the Discord? How do you get access to Discord, Winters?
Member tier 2 and above.
Easy. Simple.
It's my little Discord. It's tiny compared to Deployment Zone, but it's growing, and I love each and every one of you. But now, some of you asked some questions, so now we get to see whether men of Gondor have lost their quality or not.
Yeah, and you will.
What's the quote?
It's something similar to that. I have a
time
habit.
For men of.
I deliberately misquote Lord of the Rings to Mikey P because it makes him really upset. So I think what there is, it's time for the quality of men of Gondor's to be challenged. There we go. That was the quote. He'll love that. He'll say, "Yep, that's the one."
How many times have you seen it?
Maybe 3. 3 times.
3?
Yeah. 4?
Okay. I must have seen it many. You can put a 0 on that.
Yeah.
That's close.
All right.
And I can't remember the quote. Right, let's do this. Members' questions from the members, Winters SEO members thing. You've corralled them all up.
I've grabbed some of them. So actually, a few members asked several questions each. So depending on how this goes, I can if we'll go back to your other questions as well, guys. Don't worry. We're not gonna. It doesn't mean that the other questions are in the bin.
Okay.
I just picked these ones out. The first one is from Rue, who is a person who at one of our events turned to chaos. Do you remember Rue? He turned to chaos.
Oh yeah.
We corrupted him. You and me.
We turned into chaos.
We applied serious peer pressure until he turned to chaos. I think he was the first one to fall. Then in other events, people have fallen since. From us. I
love this guy. The next event he came to, he had repainted some of his Space Marine army with all the. He went full in. He was a loyalist. Yeah. Well, he was on the edge. He always said that was part of his lore, on the edge.
Yep.
And we were the ones. And this particular, it's beautiful, man. It's beautiful.
We're proud of you, Rue.
So hi, Rue. What did he ask? I'm sure it's a genius question.
He asks, "What would Abaddon do if he actually won?" And I mean, proper one.
He's not going to win. It's a stupid question. Move on.
Shall I finish it, or do we just move straight on?
Oh, go on then. Is there a part 2? Well, that first part, he's not going to win.
Yeah, okay. In that case, all right, Rue, we'll go for something else next time, mate. Don't worry about it. The next question.
There was the first question from the members, and it's something silly like, what would Abaddon do if he actually... He can't win. He's Abaddon. The problem
we've got is...
We have the Emperor on our side.
We've got an Emperor lover here. We've got a fan of the Emperor.
I think me and you just decided that either the Necrons or the Tyranids are going to win it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, what are you guys asking all this stuff about win. Human Space Marines? They're just a little drop in the ocean, mate. We don't want to talk about them. Right, Fropome. Also seen at events and
love that guy.
Good to see you there. What did the Traitor Marines want from the Emperor? Their most common complaint seems to have been that once he'd finished with them, he was bound to get rid of them. But why assume he'd do that?
Right, that was a lot of questions. What was the first one?
So the first bit, it was actually all the same question. The first bit is, what did the Traitor Marines want from the Emperor?
For him to go away. What's the next bit?
And then it was, they seemed to complain that they were going to be binned off when there were no more use.
That's not a question.
No, he was
Some of them complained some of them complained, of course, didn't they, that they were going to get binned off. Some were a bit worried about that. But some, like Angron, Perturabo, and Fulgrim, just sided with Horus just like that. And the Night Lords didn't need any particular pushing. The Legionnaires that were mainly from... There was a division in the later parts of the Crusade. Like, most, but not all, of the Traitor Astartes that died on Isfahan 3 were loyalists. And most, not all, of the Traitor Astartes that sided with Horus were... sorry, what would most but not all of the Traitor Astartes who died on Isfahan 3 came from Terra, but not all of them.
Yeah.
And then most of the traitors who sided with Horus didn't come from Terra. They owed more fealty to their own Primarchs than they did to the Emperor. Not all of them were like Ammit or Garrow or Loken or Khan or Bile and were born on Terra and remember literally marching alongside the Emperor. Most of them were born on Prospero or Caliban or places like that.
Yep.
So they wanted him to go away. Some of them just owed fealty more to their Primarchs. It gets even more complicated when you think about the Mechanicum, because the Mechanicum were much more disjointed and much more fractured back then than they are now. Now Mars has much more of an iron stamp, and the Scutari are everywhere. And the Scutari are the legions from Mars, which are now on all the Forge Worlds, and all the Forge Worlds have their own Scutari legions, but back then they were just only on Mars, and there was loads of different dukes and vassals and lords and knights and sirs and bishops and dames, and it was all, and some of the Mechanicum went because the Fabricator General of Mars said, oh, come this way. Some went to Terra for other reasons. Some had all these different kingly and vassally bonds, and they were bonded hard with Vasseline, so that when some went that way and the knightly house went that way, then they slipped through the gaps and went the other way because of the Vasseline. So it was a lot more. So when you look at the Mechanicum's reasons, you can basically pick a reason, and that's why the Mechanicum turned either right or left, or didn't. Many of them stayed neutral, wait to see the outcome of the war, and then sided with the ones who won, a la Metallica. And that's why Metallica got smushed after the war and had been loyal and been as pure can be for the 10,000 years since, proving that, hey, look, we really meant to side with you. We just hadn't got around making our minds. Oh, no, it was the data cores were down. We were looking after ourselves. So the idea that he was just going to replace them was a true idea that some Marines thought.
Yeah,
and were aware of. And when I did the deep dive with Quipster, Quipster doesn't think that the Space Marines were meant to be replaced at all. He thinks that they were meant to be out there governing worlds and things. And then I threw Night Lords at him, and then I threw... But, you know, Quipster's an optimistic kind of puppy.
He is.
So he thinks that there was a space in the future galaxy for Space Marines, whereas I don't think so. I think Mount Ararat Thunder Warriors Part 2 was coming on after they burnt themselves out in a self-engineered heresy that the Emperor baked into the cookie dough at the start of the experiment. Over to you, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say, bringing up the Night Lords there, obviously as more of a Chaos Lore fan, I can bring more... from their perspective, but I think it summed up really well in the way that in the 41st millennium, the way the Night Lords are, is they've kind of divided up amongst themselves into groups of with different sort of mindsets, and some of them are just very aware of the fact that they were a tool, and they knew that they were there. They knew that they were being used for that purpose, and they knew that they were pieces of shit, basically, and it was never despite the fact that they ended up on the side of the Horus Heresy they did, it's almost like it was, well, this is what we were made for. We were made to be the worst thing imaginable in the night. You know, we're made to be the people that frighten a planet into submission. And when that was no longer needed, then we'd be no longer needed. And then obviously you have the Traitor Marines that reflect more of the traditional, like, oh, you know, we want to get rid of we hate the Imperium, we hate everything that the Emperor stands for, and then you have things like the Death Guard, who in Lords of Silence, the Death Guard, it's quite a prominent theme in it that there's just not actually that much anger anymore in them. You know, whatever it was that was driving their hatred towards the Imperium and the Emperor, it's just not really there anymore. It's kind of burnt out. So
it's gone. They don't care.
No. And I think it's very interesting.
Just love Nurgle.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. I don't think there's a single answer like Winters was getting at there. I don't think there's a single answer to what their real beef was, because there was many, many, many reasons why people ended up where they did in that war.
Yes. I would say, as ever, when it comes to the heresy, there's never one answer to a question. So, question, is the Emperor good? Well, let's go on a big story talking about what good is.
Yeah.
And then other people's point of views. There's never one answer when it comes to something as big as the heresy. So the one thing that popped into my head when you mentioned Night Lords, by the way, is, do you know how many loyalist Night Lords armies there are out there? Well, not loyalist Night Lords armies, but I've spoken to quite a few people, get messages, people who've made Night Lords armies saying, we hate everyone. We hate Chaos and the Imperium. We hate you all. Yeah. We've got our own little war band. Have you read the Night Lords trilogy from Aaron Dembski-Bode? And if you haven't, oh my God, go and read it straight away, or listen to it on audiobook, because it's also really well done. I think it's Toby Longworth on the audiobooks as well, so it's amazing on audiobooks. And the number of loyalist Night Lords armies that I know out there, that people use literally the Chaos book, but don't put any demons in there at all.
I think they
will fight anyone.
They might have missed the point a little bit there, though. I think...
No, because there will be war bands, Night Lords.
There will be.
After the heresy split, there will be. 40k is such a vast 200 billion stars. There's going to be a couple of war bands out there of Night Lords who never said one way or the other, who never fought for Horus, who just hated the other Night Lords and hated what they were about, and been around since the dawn of the Imperium, and they're just trying to get by, making their way in the world, doing some pirate raids every now and then for
I think there's
some
a bit
dodgy
of a trap.
geezers, bringing back some loot, getting paid.
I think there's a little bit of a trap that people fall into with the Night Lords trilogy. It's absolutely fantastic, but I think Talos is a very unique individual in both the traitor side of the Marines and in the way that we see him operate, and his kind of the thing we got to remember is that the Nostraman Astartes are people that were raping and murdering from a young age. They are not going to be as the proud military tradition-based Astartes that perhaps some people want them to be. I think they're always going to be on the bad side, the cruel and sick and twisted side of the spectrum. Whenever you have them, and I think people have been lulled into this idea that Talos shows that you can be a really cool renegade and you can be really nice, but he does some awful things as well. We're seeing it such from their perspective that we don't have, if it was just to be written purely from people experiencing what it's like to be subjugated by them, you wouldn't like any of those characters. They'd be awful, horrible characters.
No.
But they're fun and engaging and cool because that's where you're part of them. You're part of their posse in the books.
Yeah, but Chris, though, even a good guy Space Marine, right? Hi, Warsmith Chris. Do you worship the God Emperor of Man?
I don't.
No, dead. So you'll be dead then.
Exactly.
Space Marine kill you.
See ya.
So even meeting a good Space Marine it's yeah.
No, I know what you mean. I know. So,
and then you've got ADB's. Who's the Thousand Suns guy in the Talon of Horus and Black Legion?
What's his name?
Iskandir.
I love him. Iskandir. Yeah, Iskandor.
Yeah, I mean,
amazing
he
character.
knows chaos. He's Thousand Suns. He's clever. He's a genius, and but he just sees, like Araman used to see, he just sees it as another tool he can use. Exoplaneer. They see it as, here's another part of material space where the laws of stuff breaks down. Hey, let me introduce you to quantum physics as well. Here's another part where the laws break down. There's loads of parts where the laws break down. So there are these characters in and amongst the chaos guys who haven't got a chaos splash on them at all.
No.
Just like there's good guys that have got plenty of chaos in them and turn, like Huron Lufthart. He changed. He turned into a bad boy.
Yeah, he got fed up. He's a really good example of what happens when you have to deal with too much paperwork. Like, if you're trying to get an extension on your house and the council want you to fill out Form B and then A and then G16 and stuff like that. It will turn anyone to chaos, and that's essentially what happened to him. He got absolutely sick of the bureaucracy, and it made him malleable, made him chaosify. So, yeah, that's a different story, though.
Well, yeah.
Listen, we need to...
Yeah, but he's also a cautionary tale on once you turn from the Emperor's light, you've got a 99.99% chance of corrupting and falling to chaos anyway. So one of the enduring questions from the Horus Heresy is, did the Alpha Legion or the Night Lords turn? The answer to that is, well, it doesn't really matter how many turned back then. By the time you get to 40k, most of them have.
Well, you're forced
because you've turned from the Emperor's light, and how are they going? What?
Yeah. Well, they're forced to live in a place where your very material body is corrupted without you being able to stop it.
When you turn from the Emperor's light, you're forced to live in dark places, and the dark sinks in. So there still might be, and there still will be, some loyalist Night Lords and Alpha Legion and things like that out there. But their numbers will be few and far between.
I think.
Any more questions?
No, I think that is a good play. We've hit the hour. We're going to try and keep these to about an hour, unless we get really super excited.
Nice,
which might happen. So, basically, we only answered one question. But if you want us to answer your questions, start thinking. Get those juices. Put the kettle on, flip the kettle on, and let it all boil up in there, and see if some really cool stuff comes out. Because we're looking at answering questions and things that are new, the things that people want to discuss, and see what happens. And there you can.
Milk first.
He's got that's a special. That's a new style one. That's amazing.
This is the way the world ends.
Wow.
It's like a plug. I'm pimping my shit, yo.
He's pimping it. Can people get that? Is that available now?
People can get that on the YouTube. You go to the YouTube store and you click on there, and then you can buy stuff from the store, and it's ridiculously expensive. But I can't do anything about the cost. That's because the people who make the mug have got to get the share. YouTube have got to get the share. I've got to get a cut, yo. It's stupid expensive, but she bought me one anyway.
Yeah. So if you've got some spare dollars and you want to get some really cool stuff that's stupidly expensive, but everyone gets their cut, go to the YouTube shop thing. I want one of those cups. I'll spend stupid amount of money and have one of those. And thank you for joining us for episode 2.
I didn't sell it very well.
I think you sold it fine. You just,
that was good. I'm enjoying this. I'm looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time, Mr. Chris.
Yes,
this will be lovely. I'm hoping for some more intelligent questions next time.
Yeah, it's part 3 of the trilogy. This is where we really see what we're made of, right? And we want to see what questions you're made of. Go on the Discord, please. Go to the STC room. Post some questions in there. The people who we did look at your questions today, you did ask other things. I'll go back and grab some of those as well. Just because. Sorry, Rue, we didn't answer your question. You didn't want to do it, but
we could do a whole long hour of answering questions next time, because it'll be Return of the Jedi, right? It's the trilogy.
Right, yeah, it's the trilogy. So maybe we'll make it all
Return
about
of the
you.
King.
But we need some good questions if we're going to do that. So, get on there and do it. And thank you very much for joining us. I've had a great time. My name's Warsmith Chris. This is Winters. Enjoy the music, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Love you. Thank you. Love you.